While reading The Lord of the Rings, you will encounter over 50 poems. Sometimes they will be in the form of songs, other times prophetic verse, and others still, an ancient poem of an ancient people. Especially if you read the books after watching the movies, you may not have appreciated just how often Tolkien includes verse in The Lord of the Rings, and sometimes you may even find it boring and skip them. You may wonder what the point is. If you're in this position, or you're wondering what exactly Tolkien was trying to achieve, the next time you stumble upon one of these poems, I'd like you to keep a few things in mind. To begin, there are always the out-of-text reasons. Tolkien is remembered primarily as the author of The Lord of the Rings, and his contributions to poetry are often forgotten or take a secondary place. Tolkien adored poetry, and it was one of the things that made him fall in love with history and ancient texts, the way that the people of our past would express themselves artistically. Throughout his life, Tolkien would work at translating medieval poetry, and most importantly, he would write his own. In fact, it was through poetry that he first expressed himself in what ultimately became The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion. It was through a poem that he first put into words the travels of a certain star, Earendel, and his eternal journey through the morning and night sky. From this spawned more ideas, greater in complexity and scale, and it is through his love of poetry that we have The Lord of the Rings today. Other than the beauty of verse, and of its inherent historical value in our culture, Tolkien truly enjoyed the process of writing it, of trying to figure out a way to make it work, to make it beautiful, within the structural limitations he had set on himself. To quote the professor, "Verse is, in many ways, like games. The net is just a nuisance. The white lines are silly and unreasonable. All they do is to make some lovely hard hits count as out. But without them, I suppose you could just swipe the ball where you felt inclined. But actually the most beautiful, graceful, and determined strokes are made by those who have learned to obey the rules and still hit the ball with force." And even when he wanted to write prose, he would often put his thoughts into verse first, and then write down what he actually wanted to say. This would enable him to think thoroughly of his ideas, their implication and their impact. Thus, a good starting point to understand why The Lord of the Rings contains so much poetry is simply because writing was one of Tolkien's hobbies, and writing poetry was one of his greatest passions. It was as if unlocking a part of language itself, something that was hidden until you found that perfect combination of words that brought it all together. Tolkien's out-of-text reasons, however, are not enough to justify their inclusion into The Lord of the Rings itself. The book is not the masterpiece that it is by Tolkien simply doing what he thought of in the moment. Poems represent something much deeper, and I would argue that they're one of the primary reasons that Middle-earth means as much as it does to people. Language and its evolution into music and poetry are some of humanity's deepest artistic expressions. They can relate to everyone, regardless of who they are. They can touch you deeply. They can make you wonder, cry, cheer. Through them, primarily, you can find an escape, if only for a moment. In The Lord of the Rings, songs and poems represent exactly this. They act the same as in our real world. There is no civilization in the world that has not produced art. In fact, I would argue that the production of art is something that makes a civilization. The hobbits could have simply been described in the same exact way, cheery, happy, and content, but without their songs and their verses, they would not be our hobbits. A people cannot be happy and cheery and content without anything to show for it. By having them break out into song when they're drunk and happy and dancing with their friends, singing together songs that they all know, you create an illusion that what you're reading is real, an account of actual events, not a made-up story. These people actually exist. They have lives and experiences together. They have free time that they spend on their own artistic endeavors. Not every one of Tolkien's poems and songs are equal, but they all add to this feeling that Middle-earth is alive, perhaps more so than any other thing he could have constructed. It's easy to make up backstories for countries and ancient lore. I've done it numerous times as a dungeon master, but it's a lot harder to create a breathing, living world. A civilization does not breathe if it does not express itself. And this is just a generalization of all the poems in the book, but once you actually pay attention to them, your experience grows into something more. Bilbo's "The Road Goes Ever On" captures the essence of his character and of our story to perfection. The Ring verse fills us with dread and mystery. It hints power and menace, something ancient and forbidden. But my personal favorite use of poems within Tolkien's stories are when he builds up the history of a civilization to convey certain emotions. In fact, I can claim boldly that the nostalgia, the loss, and the suffering of the dwarves, their longing for home, could not have been expressed better than they did in the Hobbit's unexpected party. Far Over the Misty Mountains Cold represents the history of a people. Every one of them knows it, and tears fill the eyes of both them and their audience. You can almost see what they've lost just from the pain of their verse. And perhaps my favorite has to be Gimli's song, the Song of Durin, which starts with the rise of the father of the dwarves in the ancient days, but ends with their present plight. It begins with might. The world was young, the mountains green, no stain yet on the moon was seen. No words were laid on stream or stone, when Durin woke and walked alone. He named the nameless hills and dells, he drank from yet untasted wells. He stooped and looked in Mirrormere, and saw a crown of stars appear, as gems upon a silver thread, above the shadow of his head. The world was fair, the mountains tall, in elder days before the fall of mighty kings in Nargothrond, and Gondolin who now beyond the western seas have passed away. The world was fair in Durin's day. And it ends 4 stanzas later with a whimper with a promise of renewal. The world is grey, the mountains old, the forge's fire is ashen cold. No harp is rung, no hammer falls, the darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his tomb, in Moria, in Khazad-dûm, but still the sunken stars appear, in dark and windless Mirrormere. There lies his crown in water deep, till Durin wakes again from sleep. I do not think the dwarves would be what they are without this poem. With just a page, Tolkien transformed a general description into the very essence of an entire civilization just waiting to be discovered. And though I would love to read poetry to you for an hour and a half, I will briefly mention the similar feelings of antiquity, nostalgia, and longing emanating from the poetry of the elves. Their art is beautiful, and yet the sadness within cannot be contained in any one person's heart. While the poetry of the dwarves promises renewal, a sense that they will reclaim what they've lost, the tragedy of the elves is that they can and will not. What was, was. They must pass on to the west and forget Middle-earth, and they will bring their verse and pain with them, and those left behind, those who knew of the elves, will eventually forget, their stories lost. How many people from history have been lost, their art forgotten, their impact no longer understood? Gil-galad was an elven king, of him the harpers sadly sing, the last whose realm was fair and free, between the mountains and the sea. His sword was long, his lance was keen, his shining helm afar was seen, the countless stars of heaven's field were mirrored in his silver shield. But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say, for into darkness fell his star, in Mordor where the shadows are. Will Gil-galad be remembered for his sacrifice? We can only hope. Ultimately, we get the point. Poetry is, in my view, something that contributes to the soul of The Lord of the Rings. It's one of the things that distinguishes it from other works, and especially other works of fantasy. I could write an epic story about elves and dwarves, but it is a lot more difficult to touch someone's soul and stir within them nostalgia for a people and a world that don't exist. And with that, I will end with my own favorite of Tolkien's verses, perhaps a bit of a cliché. All that is gold does not glitter, Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.